Okay, welcome and Tov to everybody. I'd like to give a very brief introduction to what we're going to be talking about this evening. This is the fourth and last segment of a four-part series. Each one of these components stands alone, but they're all united by a certain element, and I'd like to share with you what that element is. I would imagine that a lot of you have been exposed to certain aspects of Rav Kook's teaching, and when people think about the name Rav Kook, I think they tend to think of in some ways, the ideological founder of religious Zionism, and the aspects of his teachings which are usually quoted have something to do with his understanding of the historical process of return to Zion, the notion of redemption that is going on from his point of view. But in fact, when you look at Rav Kook's teachings carefully, much of his teachings, as a matter of fact, I would say most of it, actually doesn't deal with sort of the, perhaps could call the macro issues of the historical processes facing the Jewish people and Zionism, Shivat Zion, etc. He actually deals mostly with very personal, intimate issues of the struggle to be a human being, the struggle to grow as a human being and as a Jew. And it's that particular aspect of Rav Kook's teachings, which is actually most of his teachings, but the less well-known aspect of his teachings, which I wanted to focus on in this particular course. And what struck me about these particular passages, yes? What struck me about these passages in Rav Kook's teachings...
I mean, why would you say that's the bulk of this teaching?
Just by volume. By volume. You know, if you put it on a scale, the things that talk about sort of the macro historical processes versus kind of the internal notion of Avodat Hashem, I think is probably a pretty good guess to say that actually is the bulk of it. But whatever, it doesn't really matter. The point is that there's these two aspects of our teachings, and one of them is less well known than the others. Now, were you when I did the Shavta Adash V'Lakecha V'Hashivoteh?
The last 2 weeks.
The last 2 weeks, okay. The Seder. Yeah, you were when we did the Cosmic Tshuva.
And 2 weeks ago was about the ways of Rav Kook and how they sort of thing, like the Tshuva, the ways of the Tshuva.
Yeah.
And last week...
The Seder. That's all I need to know. It gets confusing because I don't know who was here and who was not here, and I don't want to bore everybody or anybody. But in any case, what strikes me as being particularly interesting about these passages in Rav Kook is what a remarkably fresh perspective he brings to issues which we're all familiar with, but he frames them in this extremely fresh, surprising perspective. And we're going to, of course, see an example of how we tend to view a certain issue in a certain way, a way which is unhelpful, and then Rav Kook will take that same exact issue but frame it in a remarkably different way, in a way which is very empowering in terms of our growing as Jews. That notion of reframing, of taking something which is the exact same set of facts, but framing it in a different way, that's the basis of cognitive therapy. You probably have heard about cognitive therapy or cognitive behavioral therapy. Is this notion that we actually create our own miseries. That's not such a novel idea. But it's not the circumstances which make us miserable. It's the way we view those circumstances, that we have these assumptions about the world, which are not necessarily true. We just imagine them to be true, and we respond emotionally as a function of these assumptions that we make, which may have nothing to do with reality.
I mean, they are true. It doesn't mean you have to react to them in a particular way.
No, the circumstances are true.
Yeah.
But the assumptions we make are not necessarily true. So, I mean, just to give you a silly example, my boss hates my guts. And whenever I'm at work, I just feel so uncomfortable there because I just know he hates my guts. Now, why do I think he hates my guts? So that could be actually completely wrong, right? Now, he may not be the friendliest guy in the world, but it may be because he has a chronic stomach ache. So it's just hard for him to smile. But it may have very little to do with hating me. So the circumstances we can't change, right? Or circumstances are the circumstances. You can sometimes change circumstances too. But what we can radically do is to be able to reframe the assumptions we make about the circumstances. And that's what Rav Kook strikes me, it does in this remarkably fresh fashion, to take something, of course, the famous macro examples of Zionism. You know, everybody's sort of agreeing upon the facts, but how do you, what are the assumptions that you make about those facts, right? Is the fact that, let's just assume for a second, it's not going to be the topic, but that, let's say one of the most famous novel ideas of Rav Kook, the secular Zionist movement was not particularly religious, right? In terms of its own self-understanding. Those people who were involved in secular Zionism did not look in the mirror and see a religious Jew, right? So that's a fact. Now what do you do with that? So from one perspective, you would say the sky is falling. This is a terrible thing. It substitutes Judaism with nationalism, you know, some kind of Jewish nationalism, etc. And it's an abomination. Or you could do what Rav Kook does, which we're not going to talk about right now, but that is to take the exact same fact, but to understand it and reframe it in a way which is remarkably different. Now, very briefly, what gave Rav Kook this capacity to view things in such a fresh perspective? So I have a theory. This is my own theory, so you can utterly reject it. That is the following. It's the fact that he came from a mixed marriage. Now, when I say that, so it's not what we normally mean by a mixed marriage.
Lefish and Lubavitch.
Very good. And this is something not a lot of people know, but apparently you know, or at least guessed, and that is that in the 19th century, so Eastern European Jewry was pretty clearly divided between these two camps of those under the sway of Hasidism, and then the Litvish and Misnagdim, right? And you're probably aware of Jewish history in terms of the tremendous hostility between these two worlds, to the extent that the famous bans that the Vilna Gaon issued against the Hasidim, not to marry with them, not to eat their shchita, not to daven with them, etc. So no love was lost between these particular camps. Not too long ago, we had the great holiday of Yud Tet Kislev, which you may have heard of, when the founder of Chabad Hasidut, Rav Shner Zalman of Ladi, was actually imprisoned in Tsarist Russia because he was slandered by some Misnagdic rabbis. And when he was released from prison, we have the Yontif of Yud Tet Kislev. This all comes from that period of tremendous hostility between these groups. So Rav Kook comes from a mixed marriage. His father is emerging out of the great Litvish world of the Misnagdim. His father also had learned in Volozhin, by the way. He's coming out of the Harvard, Cambridge, Oxford. I don't want to offend anybody around here. The greatest yeshiva of the time, founded by the chief disciple of the Vilna Gaon, Chaim of Volozhin. And his mother came from Chabad Hasidic stock. Now, I don't know how that should have happened. I'm sure it was not a singles bar, I'll tell you that. Right? But it is interesting. I do not think it was very common at that time. And Rav Kook represents this kind of integration between two worlds, which one would think don't mix very easily, and in terms of, sociologically, certainly didn't mix too easily at that time. And I think it created a kind of freshness in Rav Kook's perspective, that he had these two elements within him. I just want to briefly tell you.
And that his parents made that choice.
Yeah, so again, I don't know this. I don't know how they got together. So I don't know. Maybe they didn't make the choice.
No, not his parents. I mean, their parents made it. Oh right, yeah.
Yes, I don't know what happened, but that'd be interesting.
It must have been coming from some.
Yeah, it'd be very interesting to find out how that should have took place between his parents. I don't know the story. I'm going to send Aaron over here. He's going to do the research, find out how Rav Kook's parents found each other.
I assume it was with the permission of the respective parents.
I would assume so.
And that says something about
it's
them.
not like they eloped to Las Vegas or something like that.
That says something about them,
Right.
And where each of the...
But you'll see, it wasn't simple. So I just want to tell you a famous story that kind of illustrates this kind of uniqueness, which I think was a product of this so-called mixed marriage. So when Rav Kook was a young teenager, so he came home from learning, and he wanted to make his father proud. His father was a big Talmid Chacham, so in those kinds of families, if you want to give nachas to your father, so you share some learning, some kind of chiddush, some novel idea that you came up with. And Rav Kook was an Ilui. He was a tremendous genius, the boy, Rav Kook. He was not Rav Kook at the time. And so he says to his father, Tati, I'd like to show you something. He takes out of his pocket a piece of paper, and he gives it to his father. And his father looks at it. He's not smiling. It was a poem that this young Rav Kook had written, expressing his ecstatic love for God. And so Rav Kook's father looks at it, and now I don't know what he said, but I can imagine it's something like that, like, what does this have to do with Yiddishkeit? Something along those lines. Give me a pilpul, some ingenious Talmudic analysis, a love poem for God. The next time that Rav Kook came home was Hanukkah. And Rav Kook was a quick learner. So comes up to his father, Tati, I have something to show you. Takes a piece of paper, gives it to his father. His father looks at it. He's prepared for the worst. And he has a little smile on his face this time. It was all the laws of Hanukkah in rhymed verse. You ever see this? It's been published. I've learned it. You can learn it like a piece of Torah. It's a really brilliant analysis of the laws of Hanukkah, but in rhymed verse. Now, who would do such a thing? Well, what does that show you? I think it's sort of almost like a metaphorical expression of this kind of combination that Rav Kook had the soul of a chassid and the brain of a misnagid. The law of pilpul, the laws of Hanukkah in rhyme verse. And so I would like to think that to a certain extent his ability to approach things in this very fresh manner was a function of this very unusual background that he came from. Rav Kook, as I mentioned before, he learned in the same yeshiva that his father learned with Volozhin, which was the most famous yeshiva in the world at that time. It was headed by the famous Netziv, Rav Naftali Sid Yehuda Berlin. Rabbi Meir Bar Ilan, like Bar Ilan University, was the youngest son of the Netziv. There's a connection that we know about. Right? He changed his name to Bar Ilan, Berlin. His name was not Bar Ilan, his name was Berlin. Okay, so that's how Bar Ilan, that name, Bar Ilan. In any case, Rav Kook then married the daughter of the Rav of Panovich. Panovich nowadays is a huge yeshiva in Bnei Brak. Well, Panovich used to be a town, right? And the yeshiva was called Panovich because it really did have a name, but they called it Panovich because of the town it came from. And the Rav of Panovich, of that town, was a huge Talmid Chacham, whose name was Rav Rabinovich. He's usually called Rav Rabinovich Te'omim. What are Te'omim? Twins. Why was he called Rav Rabinovich Te'omim? Because he had a twin brother. And they used to call it Te'omim, right? So Rav Kook married the daughter. I'm just going to tell you as a footnote because it illustrates how remarkable Rav Kook was. These stories are, I don't really like stories about the lives of the saints that always seem so exaggerated. These stories of Rav Kook are just, they're down to earth. They have the feel of truth to them, but at the same time, this remarkable personality. I just want to just quickly tell you the story about, you'll forgive this, pretty soon, at least in America, it's Valentine's Day. Is that true? Or is that today? Or, you know what that is?
February 14th.
Yeah, this is a very goyish holiday. It's in a month, right? But as I mentioned that just in order to justify me telling you the story quickly about Rav Kook's love life. You want to hear something unbelievable? He married the daughter of the Rav of Panovich, right? So the Rav of Panovich had a twin brother. That brother died young. And the living brother, Rav Kook's father-in-law, raised his niece. Okay, so Rav Rav Kook's father-in-law raised his own children, plus he raised a niece who was the daughter of his deceased brother. You got that? Okay. Rav Kook marries the daughter, right, of this Rabinovich. She passes away after a few years of marriage. Great tragedy. Rav Rabinovich Ta'omim says to Rav Kook, I just experienced a devastating tragedy. I lost my daughter. But please, I don't want to lose my son-in-law too. Would you please marry my other daughter? Meaning his niece. Right? It was actually his niece. Rav Kook's second wife was the first cousin of his first wife. And they're kind of functionally sisters. They were raised together in the same home. Right? Now, when Rav Kook's son married his father-in-law's son. Yeah. Rav Kook's son, he had a son who became old enough.
Yeah.
He married his brother-in-law.
His brother? No.
Yes, his brother-in-law.
Sister-in-law.
No, Rav Kook's. Sorry. Rav Kook's son. Wait, no, his daughter. Sorry,
Okay.
thank you. Now I got it. Right. This is like learning Yevamos. So Rav Kook's daughter married his brother-in-law, who was the son of his father-in-law. I mean, the beautiful, unbelievable relationship. You know, people talk usually about in-laws. We're actually marrying off a daughter a week from tonight. Like, you know, it's like, wait, who's that? Who are those two people over there? This could be my son-in-law. Like, oh, wait a second. You know, it's a little, probably married off children. It's, you know, takes some digesting. You know, it's good enough for my daughter. And who are those two people over there? I'm going to be related to them. And, you know, sometimes it's easier and sometimes it's not so easy. Rav Kook's father-in-law and Rav Kook were so bound up in the most beautiful, loving relationship. When Rav Kook's father-in-law died, he wrote a whole sefer, Aderet. Sefer Aderet. Aderet is abbreviation for his father-in-law's name. Okay? That's Rav Kook. This is someone who is able to take the way most people would look conventionally at the world and see it in such fresh lenses, in such positive and constructive ways.
We need to take out
Yeah,
some
not a problem. Not a problem. Yes.
There's a famous story. The Nazir went to Rav Kook one time and said, look, you have all these Kabbalah ideas. And so Rav Kook's response was, Kabbalah is great for the individuals of Avodat Hashem. I'm writing for the cloud.
Yeah, and that makes sense to me. I don't know if I ever heard that exact statement, but it makes sense to me because that's where you'll see an actually really good example tonight, where Rav Kook will focus on both the macro and the micro, whereas Chabad Hasidut very much focuses on the
They don't say Rav
micro.
Kook goes in the derech of Rav Tzadok Cohen, not in the derech of Chabad.
It's possible. That would require a very long
It's very
discussion.
well known that he takes a lot of ideas from.
Yeah, it's possible. It's possible, but he's extremely influenced by Chabad as well. But we can save that for another time. Okay, so let's take a look now. In order to understand this passage of Rav Kook, we need to take a look at a passage in the Torah first. Now, this particular passage in the Torah is called Parshat HaTshuvah. It's the passage in the Torah which, if you want to know something about Tshuva, right, this is where you look, okay? And the root to return, Tshuva, right, Shin Vav Vet. So that root appears 7 times in this little paragraph right here. There was a commentator at Hebrew University. He's an Italian rabbi named Umberto Cassuto. became a professor of Bible, right, at Hebrew University. He had this theory that he said that if you see a word repeated in a paragraph in the Torah 7 times, that's the way the Torah tells you that that's the theme. If you see a root 7 times in a paragraph, that's the way the Torah informs you, like, that this is the heading, right? So the heading of this particular passage is Teshuvah. Now, it's worthwhile on your own to read through this paragraph. I just want to point out a couple of things. I want to see in how many different ways the notion of teshuvah is expressed here. So if you take a look at in Pasuk Bet, I underlined it where it says V'shavta ad Hashem Elokecha, you shall return to the Lord your God, right? V'shamata b'kolo, and you'll listen to his voice, etc. So what kind of returning is that?
It's teshuvah out of fear.
Okay, so we'll put it this way: you're returning to what in that particular context there? Right? V'shavta ad Hashem Elokecha v'shamata b'kolo. Right? So it's a spiritual tshuva, right? You're returning to God's ways.
But it doesn't say v'shavta le. It says
Okay.
ad.
Excellent. Hang on to that. That's exactly where we're going to go, and just in just a few moments. Okay. Now, I just want to point out that there are other uses of that same root. So look in Pasuk Gimel for a second. V'shav Hashem Elokecha et shvutcha v'richamecha v'shav v'kibetzcha. So the Lord your God will return your captivity, and he will have mercy upon you, and he will return. So now, this is interesting, because who's doing the returning here?
God.
Yeah. So in the previous pasuk, who's doing the returning? We're returning. In this pasuk here, it's God's doing the returning. And what type of returning seems to be mentioned here? God's returning in what sense?
Bring us back to Israel.
Yeah, geographic, right? And the Jewish people. So God is going to return your captivity, meaning he's going to bring the Jewish people back from Los Angeles, even Beverly Hills, will eventually be Beverly Hills. They're going to return to Eretz Israel. So there's who is returning is different. There's a Kadosh Baruch Hu returning. It's our returning, returning to God's ways, geographic return in terms of Pasuk Gimel. Okay. Now, take a look now, and it appears a whole bunch of more times. Then I want to skip down to Yud here. So at the very end of this paragraph, we have the phrase Ki tashuv el Hashem Elokecha. Okay, and I'm sorry, what's your name?
Rivka.
Rivka. So Rivka mentioned something which is extremely important. I want to just think about the Hebrew for a second in the phrase V'shavta ad Hashem Elokecha versus Tashuv el Hashem Elokecha. Now, each one of those is 4 words, right? V'shavta ad Hashem Elokecha, Tashuv el Hashem Elokecha. Of those 4 words in each of those clauses, which are underlined here, how many of the 4 are the exact same word?
Teshuv,
Okay, so to return,
Hashem,
Hashem,
Elokecha.
Elokecha. So 3 of the 4 words are exactly the same. Now, I don't want you to get confused, because the fact that it says Vishavta and Tashuv, that happens to be the exact same word. It's just that Vishavta has that Vav HaHipuch, the conversive Vav, which converts the tense, right? So if Shavta existed by itself, it would have been you returned in the past. Vishavta means and you will return, right? And Tashuv is the simple way of saying, without the Vav HaHipuch, without the conversive Vav, you will return. Everybody got that? So the word for return, the word for Hashem, and Elokecha. 3
There's
of
a
the...
big difference, though.
Hang on. 3 of the 4 words are exactly the same.
No, but
There's only one, hang on a second, there's only...
so the Teshuv, the Shafta and the Teshuv are drastically different. One's a passive B'shavta.
It means you will return.
No. B'shavta means you'll be caused to return.
I don't think so.
Yeah, Tashuv is
No, I don't think so.
What's for Tashuv?
No.
B'shavta.
No, I don't think so.
Something.
It means you will return. It's not...
Grammatically, I'm talking about.
Yeah, I mean grammatically. It's Paul, it's call. It's not he, feel, or anything like that. Right, it's not passive. So, but what is the difference is the preposition, right? as Rivka pointed out, like it doesn't say B'shavta le Hashem Elokecha, right?
But it also says, previously it says ki tashuv,
Right.
im tashuv.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm not so sure that ki means im.
Okay.
If there, because it might mean for you will,
Okay.
right? That's probably what it means. But so the point I want to make is that we have bookends. Imagine this is sort of literary bookends. That the paragraph begins with, and you return to the Lord your God, and it ends with, and you return to the Lord your God. And the exact same phrase, except for in the first phrase it says ad, and in the last phrase it says el. Well, what does that mean? Now, if you take a look in the English here, they're translated exactly the same way.
It's not the same.
And thou shalt return unto the Lord thy God. If you take a look at verse 10, and thou shalt return unto the Lord thy God. As if the word ad and the word el mean the exact same thing, unto. So there's a very famous commentator that you probably have heard of, the Malbim. So the Malbim wrote a very extensive commentary on the Tanakh, and the Malbim was extremely interested in Hebrew language. He had a whole theory that if we understood very carefully the rules of the Hebrew language...
I've heard is in the first part, Rav Kook is talking about tshuva out of fear.
Okay, so you'll see. You'll see. Hang on to that thought. So the Malbim had this theory that if we understood Hebrew grammar properly, hey, just hang on to your point, okay? If we understood Hebrew grammar properly, we'd understand all the midrashim. Sometimes you read a midrash and you say, "Come on, that's what it means," right? But he wants to show you how the oral law and the written law are in fact intrinsically related to each other if you know enough Hebrew. That was his claim. And in the beginning of his commentary, he lays out the rules of Hebrew grammar. And guess how many rules of Hebrew grammar he comes up with? 613, just by coincidence. Okay, 613 rules of Hebrew grammar. Fine. Now, let's learn a little bit of the Malbim. Okay? So the Malbim, who, by the way, Rav Kook and the Malbim, they lived at the same time. Okay, not exactly the same years, but they overlap. So the Malbim says the following: Ki tashuv Hashem el Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha. So this is the second phrase, right? It's the second bookend, right? Tashuv el Hashem Elokecha. So the Malbim is troubled. What is el versus ad? One of the things the Malbim was extremely emphatic about is that there are no synonyms in the Hebrew language. You know, not all the Meforshim agree with that. Some Meforshim felt that there are words that mean the same thing, and they're used in Tanakh just to add sort of color by using a word that means the same thing, but a little bit different word. The Malbim rejected that idea vociferously. Now watch what he says. Ki tashuv Hashem Elokecha b'chol levavcha, she'az yavo l'madriga gedola kazo. That then they will come to this great level, mipnei shehatshuva tia el Hashem Elokecha, because the tshuva will be el Hashem Elokecha. That's the second time that the phrase appears. Lo kahatshuva shebarosh parsha. Unlike the tshuva which is mentioned in the beginning of this paragraph, shehi rak, which is only ad Hashem Elokecha. So apparently, ad and el don't mean the same thing according to the Malbim. And though he obviously doesn't translate it into English, but what does it sound like he's saying? That ad versus el, which one is a higher return?
El.
Excuse me?
El.
El, for sure. El.
You're just inching up there.
Right, exactly. So that's why I thought maybe if we were to sort of render it in English, we could say something like towards, right? Right, ad. And el is arrival. El is arrival. Fine. Now, this Malbim, that's all he says. It's a grammatical point. It helps us to translate more precisely those two phrases. He doesn't tease out, well, so what? What's the significance of that? That's what Rav Kook is going to do. So
Isn't there a medrash that says that you'll return halfway and then Hashem will come?
That is true. Let's see what Rav Kook has to say. Okay, so if you take a look at the second page, right after the Malbim, this is from Orot HaTshuva of Rav Kook. He says the following: Shotzim bemet lashuv. When a person wants to sincerely return. And now this is something we discussed in the previous weeks. Return to Rav Kook is not limited to I sinned and now I want to fix it. That was obviously tshuva, that's classical tshuva. But in Rav Kook's thinking, anything which is forward movement towards wholeness is also called tshuva. And Rav Kook even has a theory, which we spent the whole session on, I'm not going to repeat it, where he thinks that the whole world is doing tshuva. There's a kind of a cosmic tshuva, that nature is doing tshuva. Because nature is moving towards greater wholeness. Okay, and he made this famous comment about that the theory of evolution is the scientific theory most harmonious with the inner secrets of Kabbalah, because it posits the world moving towards a greater complexity and wholeness. Okay, so Rav Kook says, when we desire sincerely to return, afal pi shemu'ukavim bishvil kama miniot, even though we may be held back because of all kinds of obstacles, it's tough. Ever try to grow? Everybody here, of course. That's why we're here. It's tough. And all kinds of obstacles. What are those obstacles? Kumo bilbul dot, like confusion. So, we'll take an arbitrary example. Sometimes we have this feeling that we're stuck. But we don't know what exactly the problem is. We just know that there's sort of this sense of a malaise. I want to grow, but I don't know exactly what's wrong with my life. I just know I don't want it to be like this. I'm bored or not happy with the status quo, but I can't identify exactly what it is. So one of the problems in the challenge of growth, of teshuvah, is you need clarity. So it might be bilbul dot instead. O machbat chalishut koach, or because of weakness. So let's say I identified my problem. My problem is I bite my fingernails, which I don't. Pretend I do. I discovered it. It's my worst problem in my life. If I could only stop biting my fingernails. Well, once I've identified it, I need something in order to fix it. So I had a colleague in Los Angeles when I was a rabbi there, Rabbi Daniel Lapin. I don't know if you know him. Yeah, South Africa, right.
He taught me.
Yeah, he's amazing. What a truly remarkable teachers, yeah. So he used to, and he had a wonderful way with words.
He was in Venice Beach.
Yes, exactly. And I was in LA at the time, in Westwood.
Yeah.
So
Like his daughter is married to somebody in our community.
Whoa.
The Stearns.
yeah, okay, wonderful.
Okay.
So he used to say that human beings have a just say no muscle. And he was sort of making fun of when Ronald Reagan was president, so his wife Nancy decided to take on, the war against drugs, and she had this campaign, just say no to drugs, as if it's like so simple. You just tell the kids, just say no, and everything is fine. So Rabbi Glassman used to say, it's wonderful to just say no, but the problem is we have the just say no muscle, and if you haven't been using it for a while, it's a little flabby, like all muscles. You have to use them in order to build them up. So we may have decided that, our problem is that we bite our fingernails, but our just say no muscles are weak. And so when we put our fingers in our mouth and we start to chew on our fingernails, in order to stop doing that, we need to have a very strong just say no muscle, and we may be instead suffering from chalishut koach. Or it could be another complexity, and that is, what if it's something that is very difficult to repair because it's an interpersonal problem? When you have your own problems, like biting your fingernails, that's tough enough. But what would happen if it's an interpersonal problem? If you bite your wife's fingernails? No, that would be pretty silly. But you get the idea. When something is interpersonal, so it makes things, it's not twice as hard. It's about 20 times harder. It's an interpersonal problem.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
But if we go back to, so then the Jews roaming for 40 years, was that a tikkun or because they sinned?
Yeah. So, Rav Kook, and this is just not Rav Kook, but, there's no such thing as punishment. Things are not punishment. Things are corrective. So the sufferings and wanderings the Jewish people went through are in order to correct the defects that were present in the Jewish people. So, but just hang on to that, or else we're not going to finish.
Also, there's another thing of the people that decided, okay, we made a mistake, let's go to up there to
Yeah.
Israel now.
That's a big Torah, and we'll discuss that next year.
Okay.
That's huge, a huge idea. There's some amazing ideas about that. So Rav Kook now says the following. Af al pi shaha'ikuv gadol ma'od, even though the hindrance may be very great. V'halev muchrach liot nishbar, and the heart indeed must break because of the knowledge of the greatness of the obligation imposed upon a person to correct all their defects. In the way which is in the best possible way. Right? We're heartbroken, you know, it's Yom Kippur, and we say, this year, that's it, no more biting my fingernails. And then along comes Mivchan Chanukah, the great test of Hanukkah. You know, a few months have passed, did I do it or not? Well, it's not, you don't need mysticism for this, just look at your fingernails. Did I stop biting them or not, right? It's either yes or no. And often, if you're anything like me, it's no. Yeah, we didn't succeed, in spite of the great sincerity of our commitments on Yom Kippur. And sometimes we can be brokenhearted and should be brokenhearted at our failures. That's what Kook says. Okay. Here's where Rav Kook says something where the reframing comes in. Because the normal response to the failure of fixing biting one's fingernails is, I'm a failure. You know, again, one more year, one more attempt, and only a few months have passed, and it didn't work. And of course, that sense of defeat and that sense of failure breeds despair. And of course, it's not as if you're now encouraged to try again with greater zeal. What generally happens is you say, I ain't nothing but a hound dog. I'm a loser, like this is it. You know, you're not encouraged. So listen to what Rav Kook says. Mikol makom kevan shaharatzon lashuv b'tshuva hu amitz. But nevertheless, since the desire to return in tshuva is so powerful, afal pi she'ein b'kocho adayin l'salek et kol haminiot, even though it's not yet in one's power to remove all the obstacles, but there's such a desire. You know how I know there's a desire? Because I was crying over the fact that I still biting my fingernails. I wouldn't be crying if the ratzon wasn't there to change. So Rav Kook says, what is the takeaway from that? Listen to this. Tzrichim lekabel et ha'ara hazot shel hatshuva. One must receive this illumination of tshuva Bitor tochen hamiter makadesh, as something which purifies and sanctifies. Let's read that phrase again. Tzrichim lekabel et ha'ara hazot. That a person has to receive this he'ara from the word or, this illumination of tshuva, bitor tochen, as a content which does what? Mitaher v'mekadesh, which purifies and sanctifies. The only thing I know is that I didn't do tshuva. So why does he say that one should be likabel et ha'ara, to receive this illumination of tshuva as something which sanctifies and purifies? The only thing I did was mess up and not accomplish the goal of tshuva. So watch this. Skip down. We'll do the stuff in the middle. We're not going to skip it all together, but for right now, you see where it's 4 lines from the bottom, the second to last word says be'emet hadavar. 4 lines from the bottom of that paragraph, second to last word be'emet hadavar mitbateh. Does everybody see where we are? Be'emet hadavar mitbateh b've'ur gamur b'vitu yashal Torah. In truth, this matter is expressed in complete clarity in the expression of the Torah. V'shavta ad Hashem Elokecha ki tashuv el Hashem Elokecha, where it says in that paragraph that we just learned in the Malbim, right, that you shall return towards the Lord your God, only followed by returning to the Lord your God. So Rav Kook is saying to the reader, my dear reader, you think you blew it. You think that because you still bite your fingernails, that you're a zero. And you think that teshuvah is binary, like in computers. It's 0 or 1. That's all you have, 0 or 1. If you still bite your fingernails, you're 0. If you stop biting your fingernails, you're 1. It's not complicated. Just look at your fingernails, 0 or 1. Rav Kook says, look at the Torah. The Torah says, you'll return towards the Lord your God. And only at the end of the paragraph, it says, Ki tashuv el Hashem Elokecha. Return to the Lord your God. Rav Kook is taking the observation of the Malbim, but explains the spiritual psychological meaning of it. Tshuva is not binary, but according to Rav Kook's understanding, what would be a better word for it? Tshuva is I need a good word in English.
It's a process.
Process. It's a process. And it's a process which is not limited to the accomplishment of the ultimate goal of tshuva. That engaging in the struggle of teshuvah is also teshuvah. It's just a certain type of teshuvah. What type of teshuvah? A teshuvah of Ad Hashem Elokecha. Ad Hashem Elokecha. Now we can understand what Rav Kook meant when he said that even though the heart is broken and you feel defeated, Rav Kook says, reframe that. Put on different cognitive lenses. It's the wrong assumption to make about the same exact circumstances. It's true, you're still biting your fingernails. Everybody's agreed with that. But you're making a wrong assumption. You think that you did nothing. You think that you're a loser. You think it's 0. No, learn the Torah again. That tshuva is a process, and you fulfilled the mitzvah of returning Ad Hashem Elokecha. Now, when we make bracha before we do a mitzvah, so we say Asher Kiddishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, right? Ladik ner Shabbat, or whatever it may be. We're saying when we do a mitzvah, Asher Kiddishanu b'mitzvotav. What is the mitzvah doing, apparently? Asher Kiddishanu. God makes us holy. Asher Kiddishanu mitzvotav. God made us holy. When we do a mitzvah, it's mikadesh. You notice the word Rav Kook used? Tzrichim lekabel et ha'ara shel hatshuva. We have to receive this illumination of tshuva as something which is mitahir mikadesh. You know that you're being sanctified right now with your broken heart. That broken heart is sanctifying you and purifying you right now, just as if you did a mitzvah. Because you did. What mitzvah? Ad Hashem Elokecha. Towards the Lord your God. And that impact of the sanctification is empowering. If we can frame it in this healthy way, it empowers us to then get up and try again. And try to move further along the continuum of the process of teshuvah. This is truly remarkable. What a truly remarkable reframing of a very unhealthy way that we tend to conceive of teshuvah as binary. Rav Kook says, change your lenses. It's not binary. It's process. And what you did was powerful. Your broken heart testifies to that. Your broken heart testifies to that ratzon, to that deep desire. And receive that hair up. Enjoy it. Feel empowered by it and encouraged by it. To be able to then move the next step further. So far, so good? Any questions or comments on this so far? Okay, now what I want to do is show you something remarkable that Rav Kook does. And it relates to the comment that was made before about looking at things both on the micro and the macro. So this was very personal. It's talking about the struggle to become a better person, a better Jew. Watch what Rav Kook does now. He says that everything that takes place in our lives as individual Jews also is taking place on a kind of a macro level in terms of Klal Yisrael, the Jewish people as a whole. So take a look at this now. We're going to, the same page, where it's now the third line from the top, the last word, it says He'arat HaTshuvah, this illumination of Tshuva. So this illumination of Tshuva, which when we're doing even baby steps or even failures, right, but with a powerful will, that's also illumination of Tshuva. So Rav Kook says, just like that illumination of Tshuva can be in us when we're brokenhearted over the failure to stop biting our fingernails, Herata Tshuva Yeshna B'Yisrael. This illuminated Tshuva exists also in the nation, Israel as the nation. Not just our individual personalities, but the whole nation. Please explain yourself, Rav Kook. Hit-orerut chefza shel ha'uma bichlala. The arousal of the desire of the nation as a totality. Lashuv el otzah, to return to its land. El mehuta, to return to its essence. To ask oneself, what does it mean to be a Jew? And I want to be, can have very confused ideas of what that may mean, but that's my question at least. El rucha vel tchunata, to return to the spirit, to the quality of what it means to be a Jew. Be'emet or shel tshuva yeshba, this is a light of tshuva within that. Now, of course, when Rav Kook talks about the arousal of the nation as a whole to return to its language, etc., to return to its land, what is he talking about?
Zionism.
Right? The Z word. The ineffable word. Zionism, right? Of course. Right? Zionism. And again, look at this unbelievably fresh reframing. From many Orthodox rabbis' point of view, Zionism is an anathema. These people are pork-eating, Shabbos desecrating. How can a person be excited about something like that? Rav Kook says, look deeper. It's confusing. It's mixed up with all kinds of different elements. But don't you see what's going on a deeper level? That there is a tshuva of Ad. The Jewish people are engaged in the process of rediscovering itself and of returning home in a very complex way. But it's part of the process. It's not binary. What did you think Rav Kook would say? I mean, he probably would talk like I'm talking. Did you think that the Jewish people would go from Lithuania, whatever existed in the year 1900, and with the snap of a finger, all the Jews of the world become pious, angelic Jews, and swept to Israel on the wings of eagles, and build the Beit HaMikdash within the first 24 hours, and as the righteous king, the son of David, sits on the throne? Like Rav Kook says, that's 0 or 1. That's binary. It doesn't work that way. It's process. And this thing that we call Zionism is in fact the Jewish people doing tshuva. It's the Jewish people doing tshuva of Ad Hashem Elokeinu.
Rav Kook said lots about that first paragraph that we read.
Yeah.
He said that's the process.
Yes, that's a description of the process.
He says that basically that you return unto the Lord your God, and then they'll return you back to the land with compassion. And you're not out of merit. Our merit, he's returning us because he's having compassion on us.
Yeah, that's a good point. Richamecha.
Yeah.
It's going to be rachamim. Yeah. Right, and only at the end.
And
Only at the end.
Only at the
Right?
end.
It'll be the ki tashuv el Hashem
But
Elokecha.
one is a level of fear.
Okay,
That's the point.
and
That's what I'm saying.
it's possible. So
So
Rav
I'm
Kook
saying-
doesn't mention those words. That's why I didn't want to. At least here he doesn't mention it.
He does. Rav
Yeah,
Kook does.
just I'm saying right here. I'm learning
Yeah.
this piece right here, so he doesn't mention that concept here. But the takeaway for us is in terms of not binary, not 0 or 1, but
Fear
process.
can get you out of Hashem Elokecha. Love gets you
Yeah.
to El
Perhaps.
Hashem Elokecha.
Yeah, I certainly hear what you're saying. I wouldn't argue with it. Okay, now I want to just do. We just have a couple minutes left, and I want to take a look at. I think I might have shared this with people in the past. We started out this discussion this evening describing Rav Kook's poetry written as a child, as a young adolescent, his love for God, etc. Rav Kook wrote poetry his entire life. It's interesting. Rav Kook, I think everything he wrote was poetry. Even his prose is poetry. But sometimes he sat down and he would write a poem consciously, like I'm going to write a poem. How many rabbis nowadays write poems? So let's read a poem for Rav Kook, Le Meshorer HaTshuva, to the poet of Tshuva, the singer of tshuva.
Where is this taken from? The book?
Yes, this is from Orta Tshuva. It's in Tosafot at the end.
Really?
Yeah.
I never noticed they
Yeah.
told us about them.
L'Mishorer Tshuva. Mishorer HaTshuva. Hanoladata Kvar.
He has a sense of humor.
Who's that?
I mean, just to say something like that. Were you born yet?
Well, let's see what he says. It's really, really amazing. O poet of tshuva, are you yet born? V'im b'shchakim odena tzura shama nishmatcha. And if in the heavens is yet bound up your soul, b'tzura chaim, in the bond of life, mehira reida, quickly come down. V'orer kinorcha, and arouse your harp. Yishma'u kol dik elev, and all those of oppressed hearts will hear. Ya'azinu kol ole ruach, and all those of uncircumcised spirits will listen. Lehemyat nivalecha, to the sounds of your harps. Shavu yichyu v'chayu, and they will return and live. Rav Kook with this beautiful poem asking the poet of tshuva that the Jewish nation needs poetry to excite the heart, to excite the imagination, to be able to look at things in a fresh way. And it occurred to me that in a very real sense, I think the poet of Teshuvah, Mohorer Tshuva, was born, and his soul did come into this world from the heavens. And who was that? Rav Kook. Rav Kook himself is the Mishorer HaTshuva. I don't think he meant that when he wrote it. He wasn't being self-referential. But in historical retrospect, I would say that perhaps Rav Kook's sort of lasting legacy to the Jewish people is the great poet of the spiritual processes that the Jewish people are undergoing, both as individuals and as a collective. Any comments or
Yeah,
questions?
can I mention something? Beryl One says something quite interesting about Rav Kook, that he was the Netiv's top student.
So they say.
It's quite amazing. And when Rav Kook went to the opening of the Hebrew University, he had a lot of opposition. There was Bible criticism, there was one of the departments.
Right.
I think, as you said, he saw the overall picture that
Right.
the university represented,
Right.
not the specific departments, and some of them were. Bible criticism goes against everything,
Right.
you know, but he saw the whole overall picture.
Right. So just a couple comments on that. The Rav Kook actually said that he wouldn't come if Bible criticism were taught. Of course, it didn't quite work out that way. But the other point is that if you actually read his speech, it's been published. He gave an incredible speech. And in that, like, people will say, "What a shanda! How could he have given the stempel of kashrus
that's-
on this, like, pagan academic institution?" Right? So if you actually read what he wrote, so he quotes that very famous passage in the Gemara, which is based upon the blessing that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave to the three sons of Noah, when what the blessing was Yafta Elokim Li'efet, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu was going to expand the Yefet. Yefet is the progenitor of Greece. So, culture, wisdom, secular wisdom. So the Torah goes on that God is going to expand, or the Gemara darshans it Yaf from the word Yafet. God will grant beauty, aesthetic beauty, to Greece, Vishkon Bole Shem, but only in the condition that it dwells in the tents of Shem. Shem is us, right? It has to be framed in sanctity, in Torah. Right? Beauty has its place, but it has to be within balance. So Rav Kook gives this whole drush at Hebrew University about, yes, there's a room for wisdom and learning and the arts, etc., but it has to be the ohale shem within the context of proper values and behavior and beliefs and practice, etc. Of course, people forget. So it's not like he got up there and said, "I love this idea of a secular university that teaches Bible criticism." On the contrary, he preached in that talk as a kind of a warning of both the potential of what can be created here, but also the dangers inherent if it's not done properly.
can I just say one quick thing?
Sure.
So I had a very from patient, and she told me that it's amazing that she came from Poland, and she got a entrance certificate for Hebrew University, and that saved her life.
Yeah.
So
That's
she never
interesting.
used that, but she
Yeah.
used it to come to Palestine before
Right.
right before the war,
Right.
you know, the Shoah. But having that piece of paper
For her,
from
that was
Hebrew
Pikuach
U
Nefesh.
saved
Yeah.
her life, and generations followed
Yeah.
because of that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Amazing.
some good came out of it.
Yeah, no, that's for a lot of good. And of course, everything's mixed. That's another thing Rav Kook likes to talk about is nothing is simple, right? I think we learned last week that he says that even Ruach HaKodesh, even the Holy Spirit, has tzach tzuchei tumah, sort of like fragments of impurity mixed inside of it, and they have to be sort of sifted out. So we'll stop right here, and I'm glad I had a chance to learn with you this evening, and God bless you all.
So where did you learn Rav Kook stuff?
From Art over here. You tell me everything I know.
We're all fans. I know him for many decades.
Wow. All right. Very special.
I've been learning for a long time, Rav Kook. It's been like
All right.
something very meaningful to me, and in yeshivas a little bit.
I've been learning at Machon Meir.
Yeah, that's a good place to learn Rav Kook. That's
Good to see you, Josh.
okay, Baruch Tias. No one has a car, right? Checking one more time. Okay.